So I want to do my final book presentation on a book that I would be able to use outside of the classroom because a lot of times we have to do book reports on books that maybe that we wouldn't read outside of it or that we won't get something out of. So I picked one that I would be able to use outside of this class and in the future in ministry. And so I chose Distinctive Discipleship by Travis Agnew. It also comes with a Bible study portion of it. So after you read the book, you're able to actually put into practice what you learned, what you read about. And so, a lot of times in our Christian world, there's a lot of emphasis on discipleship, but you're still left with what does that even mean? Discipleship books will take you with a plan that worked for somebody and try to make it work for somebody else. And most of the time, it's not going to work with that other person because everyone is so unique in their different ways and they need help in different ways than other people. And so, Travis's book really is a guide more so than a plan, and it helps guide you through the process of discipleship with somebody else and even using it with yourself. And so basically, his book is all about these 6 steps that will help guide you through the discipleship process. And they're all right here, and it goes into it later in the book. And then it's based off of 1 Corinthians 1:27 through 29. And it says, "To them God chose to make known how great among the Gentiles are the riches of the glory of this mystery, which is Christ in you, the hope of glory. Him we proclaim, warning everyone, and teaching everyone with all wisdom, that we may present everyone mature in Christ. For this I toil, struggling with all his energy, that he powerfully works within me." And so his whole discipleship plan is based off that one section. In the beginning of his book, there's 4 chapters that really set the groundwork for discipleship. And like a normal book, it talks about discipleship. And so the first one was about discipleship reorientation. And it says generalized approaches don't work to help develop distinct disciples. And so this is basically saying what I said at the beginning. It tries to take something that worked for somebody else and make it work for another. And it just doesn't happen with discipleship. You have to have a unique plan that will work for each individual. And another thing about discipleship orientation is the Great Commission. In the Great Commission, it's all about, most of the time people think about evangelism. But if evangelism is all you're doing and you're just creating converts, you're not fulfilling the Great Commission. The Great Commission calls us to go and make disciples. It doesn't call us to go and make converts. So if we stop short of that, we're not really fulfilling the Great Commission with just evangelism. And so there's many different reasons that we don't do discipleship. And so the first one is apathy. With apathy, it's just you don't feel like it's important or it's just not something that you want to do. Another one is insecurity. And with insecurity, it's you don't feel like you have enough knowledge to be able to do it. And then you have complexity. Discipleship is a really complex topic, and there's lots of little parts that play into it. And so it could be too complex for somebody to want to do. You may look at it and be like, I just can't do it. It's too much. Another one is unavailability. You may not have the time. Discipleship takes a lot of time, and it's okay if you don't have the time to disciple somebody else. I would suggest you make time because it's really rewarding to be able to pour into somebody's life and see them mature. And another one is unclarity. You don't really know how, like, what is discipleship? How do you even do that? And so all of those are great reasons, but this book helps you walk through each one and say, hey, I may not know all of it. I may not know all the information, but I can give what little information I have to somebody else. I know more than someone else does. And so this book is a distinctive discipleship plan for each person. The second chapter is on progressive sanctification. And so progressive sanctification is basically the same as before, saying disciples. You can't go and put each disciple on a conveyor belt and just keep making the same disciple over and over and over with the same friend. It's not going to work. Discipleship has to be done by intentional crafters, which means you're taking an individual person and you're pouring into them, and you are making sure that you know about them and they know about you, and you're just living life with them. And in order to understand progressive sanctification, there's 3 words we have to know in the Christian world. The first is justification, and justification is the declaration of holiness. So that's like the moment that you became a Christian, that moment you realized what the gospel was. The second, sanctification, is the process of holiness. And then glorification is the completion of holiness, and that's when you get to heaven. And so justification and sanctification are both only done by God. God is the only one that has any part in that. But sanctification is us and God working together on this spiritual journey. God plays a part, but we also have to put in our hard work into it as well. And so salvation is not just the starting, or salvation is not the finish line. It's just the starting point. And so you'll continue to keep working on your relationship with God through your whole life. The third chapter is on intentional imitation. And so basically this one is on true discipleship. True discipleship prioritizes imitation over information. And so this just basically means that you're going to have somebody, and while you may have all the knowledge and you're giving what knowledge you have to them, it's more than just saying, this is what I know, take it and do it. Do live with it, work with it, learn from it. It's taking that information and saying, look, watch what I've learned from it, watch how I'm living this out. And it's really taking that person and walking them alongside you through the process of life and showing them maybe the sides of you that you don't want anybody else to know. Maybe the nitty gritty, like what is it that you're really working on, and showing them how you are being able to work on that process in yourself. And so oftentimes we like to we have distinct guides that we have to be able to tell people. Everybody's different, and we have to take the discipleship plan and make it distinct to their needs, and maybe some things that they struggle with that other people don't. And so when you're really getting to know these people in the setting of discipleship, there's going to be 6 events that are going to happen in their spiritual journey, or 6 components that play into their spiritual journey. When you're talking to them about things, there's going to be, the first one is there's going to be events that happen in the person's life. There's going to be at the time that someone shared the gospel with them, and that's when they became a Christian. There's going to be an environment that maybe they grew up in a Christian home and service was just always there, so they grew up knowing and really loving the Lord. Equipment, there's going to be spiritual discipline that helped them grow in their journey. It could be they didn't read their Bible, but when they started reading their Bible, they saw how that changed the way they were working with other people. There's going to be engagement, where at some point they stopped receiving the information. They'll always continue to receive the information, but they stopped just sitting there and receiving it, but they went out and they served with it. Either they went on a mission trip and they saw how what it really means to live out your faith, or they started working in the church. The second is there's going to be an encourager in their life. There's going to be a friend, there's going to be a family member that really encouraged them in their journey. And there's also going to be an example. And a lot of times this is where it gets shifty, because not a lot of people, some people may not have an example that they followed for spiritual reasons. They may have just had the encourager. Their student pastor was their encourager. He didn't really set the example. And so a lot of Christians feel that the mentoring in the spiritual disciplines is just by default. It's not by design. The student pastor didn't go and sit with them. They just happened to be in the student ministry where the student pastor was teaching, but the student pastor didn't sit down with them intentionally at lunch and really talk to them about what they're going through in their life. And so imitating with this distinctive discipleship plan, this plan is a good plan to use with an individual. It's better to be used with 2 people, so you and a friend or you and an accountability partner, but it's best to be used with you and a mentor, someone who's further along in their life than you are. And so the 4th chapter was on strategic formation, and this is basically just saying it's okay to feel stagnant in your faith, but it's not okay to stay there. And so if you're in your faith and you were just stuck and you really feel like you don't know a lot about the Bible, or you may not know some facts about the Bible, or you feel bad that you're not in your devotion every day, if you keep saying that over and over but there's no progress, that's not acceptable in God's eyes. You got to constantly be working and getting better, and it's going to be gradual steps in the process of sanctification. And so back to Colossians, as we go into the 6 categories of discipleship that Travis goes over, it says we'll skip on down to the end of verse 27 where it says, which is Christ in you, the hope of glory. And so that's where delight comes in. And then it says, warning everyone and teaching everyone with all wisdom, which is doctrine, that we may present everyone mature, which is development, in Christ Jesus. For this I toil, which is discipline, and then struggling with all his energy, which is dependence. And so there are two reasons that this process won't work for delight. Well, before I get into that, I'm going to go back and I'm going to read to you part of delight from the verse that goes with delight from Matthew 13, verse 44. It says, "The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure buried in a field that a man found and reburied. Then in his joy, he goes and sells everything he has and buys it." And so this man in this passage, he goes and he finds this treasure that is so valuable to him that he goes and he sells everything. And a lot of times in our spiritual life and our delight, we tend to want to hold on to something in our past. There's something we delight in more than Jesus. And so there's two reasons that discipleship fails. And the first is because it fails because we follow out of duty. We feel like we have to do it. We see other people doing it, so we feel like we have to, and it's not really we don't really feel like God calling us to that, but God calls everybody to it. Or the second is sometimes that we delight in something more than Jesus. And so if we're delighting in something more than Jesus, it could be our family, it could be our job, it could be our money, it could be people, it could be our friends. There's all these different things that we could be delighting in that's more than Jesus. And so when we surrender our lives to the Lord, sometimes we may feel like, oh, like I'm leaving whatever I did in the past. I like doing this, but now I'm going to have to give it up because I'm living for Christ. And you feel like it's a miserable submission. It's a miserable submission to God. Like, I don't want to leave that, but I have to. Or you look at it and you say, look, I'm giving this up, and I see, like, this is what I could, that's so much better. And so with delight, it's really looking at the individual and saying, what is it that you delight in more than God? And so then the next one is disobedience. And that passage comes from Romans chapter 6, verse 12, that says, "Therefore do not let sin reign in your mortal body, so that you obey its desires." And so this is saying that with the progression in our faith, if we keep blaming our condition or our circumstances on our ability to sin, like we're sinning because of our conditions or our circumstances, we're never going to grow. It becomes difficult to follow Jesus when you're continually allowing the same sin to entangle you. And so with disobedience, everyone struggles with sin, but we all have the same rescue. So we all have the same rescue, but we all have different reasons that we need rescuing. And so with disobedience, you're really getting down into that personal aspect of the person's life and understanding what are some things they struggle with. And you may have to share some things that you struggle with. And it's coming up with a plan. If someone struggles with not doing their devotion, you got to stop allowing them to say, I'm struggling with not doing my devotion. I'm struggling every week. They're coming in, they're saying, I'm struggling with this, I'm struggling with this. And it's the same thing every week. That's when you step in and you say, hey, listen, like we got to have a plan to get you to stop having trouble not doing your devotion. And so with that, you would come up with a plan. You would say, okay, so you're having trouble doing your devotion. Let's say every night I'm going to text you at 8 o'clock and see what you read that day. And so it's really this whole process of discipleship that Travis is going over is coming up with a plan for each topic that you come up with. So what are you delighting in more than the Lord? You're delighting in a family or in a friends more than the Lord. So then you would come up with Bible verses or something that you could memorize that talk about that. And so disobedience, you're coming up with something that you're struggling with, and you have a plan to get over that. You're not just leaving the person. And so then the next one is doctrine. It comes from Titus chapter 2, verse 1. And it says, so Titus chapter 2, verse 1 says, "But you must say the things that are consistent with sound teaching." And so doctrine, if we haven't been able to get into the Word and read it for ourselves, and we don't understand what this says, we can't expect the world to have the same values as us then, because we don't know why we believe what we believe. And so with that, maybe you believe in predestination, in election, but you maybe that's something that your parents believe, but you don't really understand it for yourself. And then people start questioning you. You can't expect them to believe it if you don't understand it for yourself. Um, and so if you don't understand election, then you're not gonna understand it by yourself. It's not just gonna be like one day you're here and you're just sitting in your room doing homework or whatever, and all of a sudden there it comes. You understand what election's about. It takes progress. It takes lots of time and dedication, just like anything. You have to learn about it. You have to research about it and understand really what you believe for yourself. Because maybe you don't. Maybe you believe in free will. Maybe after reading this, you believe that God gives people free will to choose to believe or not to believe. So you really need to understand the word for yourself. That way, when people come to you and start questioning, you're able to back up what you believe. And so whenever you're not in the word and you're not understanding what it says, it not only puts your beliefs in danger, but it also puts your behaviors in danger. You're also going to not understand how you're supposed to behave in the right way. So with doctrine, you're asking the question, what is a doctrine that I don't know well? And so some examples of that may be you don't understand the gospel. You don't understand the Holy Spirit. You don't understand election, the deity of Christ, the image of God, the Trinity. There's so many doctrines in this book that we really have to understand. And so then the next one on here is development. And so this Bible verse comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 3. And this one says, let's see, 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 11. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put aside my childish things. And so just like in that verse, the child is developing. And when the child becomes mature, becomes an adult, he stops doing the childish things. And so the same goes for our spiritual journey. At some point, we're going to have to grow up. We're going to have to continue and develop. And so with that, there are going to be some gifts that you are given that God has given you. And there's going to be some places where you're placed where you're able to serve. And so it's taking those things that you really need to develop and get better at in order to be able to learn more in your faith and grow in your faith. So something that you may need to develop is sharing your faith with somebody else. Maybe you've never shared your testimony. For me, that's been one of the biggest ways that I've grown in my life is when I shared my testimony, it puts you in a place where you have to know what you're talking about. And so that's a good one to develop. Or it may be teaching a Bible study. That's one that I'm working on now is being a better teacher for younger kids and taking a passage that maybe was meant to be used in adult Bible study and making it, giving something that the kids can understand and take home with them to live through the week. And so God gives us gifts to use. And so that's learning how to develop. So the question you would ask them then is, what's something you need to learn how to do? And so then the next one is discipline. And so this verse comes from 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 7. And it says, verse 7 and 8. But have nothing to do with irreverent and silly myths. Rather, train yourself in godliness. For the training of the body has a limited benefit, but godliness is beneficial in every way, since it holds promise for the present life and in the life to come. And so for discipline, spiritual disciplines are premeditated activities that you think about and that you have planned into your schedule that you're working on. And so it could be scripture memory, or it could be prayer. You may need to help with prayer, so then you make like a prayer wall or something. It could be giving, it could be worship, it could be all these different disciplines. And so disciplines aren't created for us in our spiritual journey to make us more liked by God. Like you may have a teacher that if you do more, that they may like you more than if you didn't. But that's not how God works. The spiritual disciplines God gives us to become more like Him. So not to be liked more by Him, but to be more like Him. And so eventually after you prioritize a spiritual discipline, it's going to become a joyful habit at some point. And so with that one, you're just going to ask, what's the discipline you need to work on? simple enough. And so then the last one is dependence, and it comes from John chapter 15. And it says, I am the vine, you are the branches. The one who remains in me and I in you produce much fruit, because you can do nothing without me. And so this is saying that through the discipleship process, a lot of times we may get sidetracked and may think it's us doing the work, but we have to remember that we can't do any of this process without God. And so it's just remembering that there's going to be some things that we can't control. And so there's two dangerous responsibilities. There's two dangerous extremes for responsibilities with discipleship. And so the first one is the people who think they have no responsibility in their spiritual growth. And then the other one is thinking that they're the one that has it all. And so we have to be able to give God some things. And maybe it's something that's beyond our control. Like maybe you don't have a desire to read the Bible, and so you have to depend on God for that. Or maybe it's outside your sphere of influence, and so it's like a relationship that maybe you may have made a mistake at some point and messed up a relationship with somebody, and you said sorry, but there's nothing else you can do. You've said sorry, you've apologized, and you've made that known to the person, but there's nothing after that you can do. And so with that one, you would ask, what is your prayer of dependence on God? What's something that you what's something that you need to rely on God to take control of? And so the last part of the chapter, the book, comes from identifying progression in your life. And that one comes from Philippians chapter 1, verse 6. And it says, I am sure of this, that he who started a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ. And so this is saying that at the end of your life, your spiritual health at the end of your life is determined by what you're doing now. And so if you haven't started your spiritual journey, and if you haven't progressed far in your spiritual journey, why the best time to do that would have been 20 years ago. Today's the next best day to start. Trees don't grow overnight. You have to plant seeds, and they grow gradually over time. But eventually they come into this big stout tree. And so don't get discouraged in your discipleship journey. It's a long one, but it's worth it. And so we have to remember that in our churches, there's a crisis in discipleship, and that comes from an oversight and intentionality. People are sincere about it. They really want to help other people, but they often overlook the intentionality that comes into discipleship and really getting to know a person. And so I want to challenge you guys to find someone who's eager about the gospel and about learning more about Jesus, that you know more about the Bible. You may know a little more about the Bible than them. Start discipling them. Start pouring into them. God often uses those who are willing with intentionality to go and disciple somebody than he is to use someone that's seasoned in their life that's maybe has more knowledge than you, but they really don't want to take on another person to disciple. And so then at the end of the book, Travis really takes the discipleship process and puts in some resources for you in the back, and has a blog in there. And so I really enjoyed reading Travis's book. It gave me a discipleship process that I can use with my friends when I get back to school, or even this summer I can call them on the phone. So I'm super excited that I got to read this book and that I can put it into practice.